Did anybody here grow up watching Twilight Zone? Oh, right. Do you remember the episode? I don't want to go through all this too long, but it's somehow looking at this, the episode of the guy who used to go to the museum, and there was a beautiful painting of a guy rowing in the lake, and he just dreamt that he wished he could be in that painting. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Twilight Zone fan freaks? No? Okay. So I won't. I just was so awed by this picture. I was thinking like how beautiful it was if there was just a way to kind of like step in and be a part of this stuff. And then I suddenly realized, whoa, I could, because I'm in Jerusalem. It was an amazing. How about I just talk loud? Can you guys hear me back there?
Yeah.
This works. All right, tough. So I've been put on a limited amount of time. So therefore, I thought just to cover a lot of material, all I was going to do is maybe speak in acronyms, and you could fill in the letters and words later and make sense of it. Okay. So I thought that maybe what we'd do is go over some of the ideas of the Sukkah, kind of in a condensed version, because I know when they told me I'm coming to a singles group and somehow I have to tie in the Sukkah, I couldn't quite figure out like what the connection was. Then I realized, oh my gosh, you know what? Sukkah has probably the most beautiful message of marriage. And so I tried to dwell down on what that was, and maybe I'll just cut to that point as well. My son had taught me the Divrei Chaim, Sanza Rebbe. It said that there's an idea of a wall where the Rashi Tevot, like we say in the end of our Shmona Esrei, that my soul shall be like dirt before, or earth before every man, I mean before every person. And the three letters that I should be like earth before everybody actually spells the word kotel, the wall. And so I started to think about this, about especially Sukkot, because Sukkot is really, I mean, where everything we do is bizarre, but there's like an extreme degree of bizarreness when you come to the level of Sukkot, because everything becomes metaphysical. Suddenly you have walls that magically can lean, and you have walls that, if they're a certain height, can, without even moving, extend themselves up, extend themselves down. There can even be walls where if there's a hole in the middle, suddenly, magically, that wall closes it. And if you're not familiar with this halacha, it's called lavod. Lavod is if there's a certain area of under 3 handbreadths between 2 pieces of wood, it's actually considered as if it's 1 piece of wood. I remember I was in yeshiva, I got thrown out for this, because when I first learned this idea, I took a piece of paper, crumbled it, tossed it out the window between the bars. And the Rebbe says, yo, what are you doing? I said, I want to see you bounce off the lavod. But these are ideas that within the Sukkah, there are things that are mystically don't exist, but yet they do exist. It's a kind of a physical reality, but yet it's a spiritual reality. And as I started to think about all of these components, it struck me this idea of the invisible 5th wall. And the invisible 5th wall is the make or break of a Sukkah. And the invisible 5th wall is the make or break of our entire lives. Because I'm going to sort of start off on a basic level, and we're going to get deeper and deeper into some of these ideas. But everybody is familiar that the basic concept of the Sukkah is that we leave our fortress, we leave our homes, we come out into a temporary dwelling. The bottom line is to tell us something really deep. Guess what, guys? Everything is temporary. All of our life is temporary. Those fortresses that we build, we could call them our bank accounts, we can call them our careers, we can call them our positioning, we can call them whatever it is, our empire, that's temporary. And the facade is that we think that that's something that can protect us. We think that those are things that are really going to be there for us. You know, I'm going to just say it in a kind of crass way, but in the Holocaust, when we went into the camps, nobody checked what our bank account was. It's a question of understanding what is really there to protect us and what is not. And sometimes we become possessed by our possessions. The possessions, almost like Dr. Frankenstein, creates something where it owns us. So much so does it own us. I know this is kind of an abstract idea, but just to throw it out as well. Could you imagine being so owned by your possessions that people would actually wear designer labels on the outside of their clothing so that other people know what you're wearing? I mean, when I grew up as a kid, there was a guy who had that like big thing that he walked up and down the street, eat at Joe's or whatever. But like I was the somebody wants me to walk around and carry an advertisement, I want to be paid for that, not that I should pay for that. I mean, what's going on? Where have we lost our identity? And where has our identity become substituted into things that we think are so important and really they're so insignificant? I'll give you another example. If I asked you, whatever city you're from, who is by far the wealthiest man or among the top wealthiest Jews in that particular country, let's say United States, South Africa, wherever you're from, chances are you'll know the name, okay? But if I asked you who was the wealthiest person or among the top 3 wealthiest people in that same country in 1927, you might not know. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But if I mention the name Moses from 4,000 years ago, it resonates. So the question really becomes, what are the things that touch us deeply? What are the things that we really live with and live inside? The challenge of the Sukkah is to teach us how to live in the world, but not to be of the world. There's a very strange Gemara, it's actually twice in Shas, it talks about the Aron, where the luchot, the tablets, used to sit inside the tabernacle, actually just over there. And when you, actually I have to just tell you a little quick side point here. When I came to Israel, I was about as non-religious could be. I'm fourth generation American. I had a family member who actually fought in the South in the Confederacy. I think it actually was a horse thief, but they gave me a chance to go in the Army instead. And I mean, really, I was like for me, snorking that little gooey piece out of the middle of the ham bone on Yom Kippur was really kind of cool. And it was only when I came to Israel and suddenly people were talking biblical ideas and then they were referencing it. King David, you take the #1 bus, you get off it, and it's suddenly the whole being saturated inside the Jewish reality of the land of Eretz Israel and part of the people. It was, I tried to maintain that National Geographic, like until I found out I was one of the natives. But that reality of being able to live in the world, to be part of the world, and know exactly what part we are, is a critical reality. The Aron, the Talmud tells us, when it gives definition of its parameter, the Aron occupied no space, and yet it had a defined space. In one source it quotes that the distance from wall to wall was 20 amot. In another source it quotes that the distance from the wall to the side of the Aron, we know the Aron was 10 amot, and to the other side was 10 amot, which means it was 30 amot. So simultaneously the Aron was 30 amot within this distance, and 20 amot. And the Talmud's natural conclusion is it occupied no space, similar to our thoughts. Our thoughts are probably the most motivating energy that exists within our reality, but you can't touch them. They occupy no space, and yet they are the existence, the raison d'etre of everything that we do in our lives. And so this is the same idea as well. We come into a sukkah filled with all kinds of a magical, non-physical reality, a metaphysical reality, where even the very walls themselves no longer are defined by the laws of nature. They take on a supernatural being, and within this context, suddenly we learn everything about ourselves. So let's take a little look at walls. What is a wall? So the Chazal tell us, if you go through Shas, you'll find that the idea of a wall appears in 3 different contexts. One idea of a wall is protection. You put up a fence, you put up a wall, you put up a wall, of course. You put up a fence, you put up stone, something that creates protection. Another use of a wall is something that defines a misgeret, a parameter. A third use of a wall is something which creates privacy. So let's take, for example, a wall which is made out of glass, like in New York City taxis or when you come into banks, bulletproof. It doesn't afford privacy, it doesn't define any kind of an environment, but it provides protection. Then you have a type of a wall, like a sheet. The sheet can simply be something that creates privacy. It doesn't afford protection, and it doesn't define an area. And then you could have something as simple as a string, like in an erev, or in a mavoi, Or when they had Ola Laregel, again, I guess we have a visual of that, coming to Jerusalem, where there were water wells. All they needed to do was to put 4 poles, and people by mentally would define that area. So something as simple as a stick or a string could suddenly be classified as a wall. When we understand these 3 definitions of a wall, we're going to see a very beautiful idea. Chazal tell us that there's a deep connection between the Sukkah and the Beit HaMikdash. We know the idea of Sukkah David HaNofelet is really relating and waiting for the 3rd temple to be rebuilt. And we know that the whole idea of the temple is that an infinite God creates a finite world and wants to dwell inside this world with us. And the place where, as Rashi points out, that God really dwells inside is not inside the Mishkan, it's inside ourselves. So as we build our lives, as we build our homes, what we are actually doing is creating a vessel to allow God to be part of our lives. It's kind of like an old John Wayne Western where the cowboy would come in and say, listen, this town ain't big enough for the 2 of us. God says the same thing in the Gemara. It says, anybody who chas v'chalil is filled with their own ego, God says, this body isn't big enough for the 2 of us. If you're filled with yourself, then there's no room for God. The nature of building a relationship of any sort is when somebody is, God forbid, filled with himself, there's no room for somebody else. When a person sees a relationship as an opportunity to become more than who they are, then there's an infinite amount of room. And the Talmud itself says that. It says 2 people who love each other can even sleep together on the side of a sword. And 2 people who do not get along with each other, even the biggest mansion is crowded. Because it's a question of the ego. It's a question of how we are able to open ourselves up. And that's what the Sukkah does. The Sukkah tells us something about the 5th wall, which is the Succah. The wall which must be open. The wall which must be humble. We're going to get to that in a minute. Let's first finish with the 3 walls here. I'll show you something very beautiful. I don't want to go into gematrias. A lot of people are turned off by that. But I'll just share something, especially when you get into advanced gematrias like Kolel and things of this nature. If you're not familiar with it, it sounds very alien. But it's a very beautiful Torah from the Belzer Rebbe. The Belzer Rebbe says that God wanted to build a house, referring to the Beit HaMikdash, where God would dwell. And so he built the first wall. The first wall he used, the substance, is Machne Yisrael. The Jewish people are the first wall. Abraham comes along and he builds the second wall. He refers to the Temple Mount, he calls it mountain, the Har. Now, the numerical value of Machne is 103. The numerical value of Har is 102, but since Abraham is the father of all, we use the Kolel, it becomes 206. Yitzchak comes along, Isaac comes along, and he refers to the mountaintop as the field, the Sodeh. Sodeh is 309. Again, another Machna. Yitzchak builds the next wall. Yaakov comes along, and he builds the 4th wall by calling it Bayit, the home, 412, which is again 103, 103, 103, and 103. These are the 4 walls of God's house. And if we look carefully, we understand that where we find in the Psukim these words are where we learn the idea of tefillah. Each one of them is a reference to one of the avot when they went up, right over here behind me, to Har HaBayit. And the idea of tefillah, and the idea of this idea, is that there is nothing that protects the Jewish people except prayer. That's it. And prayer is the one place that opens the heart. It allows us to speak. And if we look carefully at the idea of prayer, Abraham's building of the first wall is the mountain. What is that? Protection. Yitzchak's wall is the field. What's that? The playing field with the window of opportunity. It's the shetach. It's the idea of wall as defined parameter. And that's because he was what happens inside the Beit HaMikdash. The only way to live inside the Beit HaMikdash is to be willing to sacrifice. The only way to live inside of a marriage, to live inside of a home, is to be willing to give. And being able to give and afford oneself the opportunity to realize that marriage is an opportunity to create chesed. If a person's living their life to understand the situation of service of God, there's no greater opportunity than inside a home to be able to give with chesed. And this is what Yitzhak was about, self-sacrifice to the max. And comes along Yaakov, and he is called a home. What's a home? Tsunua, privacy. It's your private space. So all three aspects of what the ideas of what walls are understood among the Jewish people are highlighted in this medrash of the three walls that complement God's wall to be able to build ourselves the home called Har HaBayit. This goes a little bit deeper, however, because you have to come back to understand what does it mean that the Jewish people are God's wall. So the answer is that this is the Succah. That we understand that there's a machloket in the Gemara in Sukkot as to what are the natures of the wall physically inside the Sukkah. We know that one opinion is that the walls can actually be made out of stone. Another opinion is it doesn't have to be, it should be more of a temporary. But we know no matter what it is, everyone agrees that the walls must be able to stand against the wind. Meaning that when we have faith, which is the lesson of Sukkah, faith makes us able to stand strong. It enables us no matter what wind comes. If it's a wind that's blowing from Iran, if it's a wind that's blowing from countries that once upon a time were our friends, wherever those winds are coming from, our walls are strong. Why? Because we do not put our faith in those things which seemingly might be our strength, because our real strength is a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And if we understand that, we have inner faith. Therefore, even in the temporary sukkah, we can have the ability to withstand the winds of the world. But when it comes to the skach, when it comes to our relationship to God, there, I'm almost afraid to say this because I know a few of us were rained out of our sukkahs last night. There, you move into this flimsy little home where not only does the roof leak, but it's a mitzvah for the roof to leak. That's what a sukkah is all about. Because the sukkah teaches us, and if we look at the halachot, we're going to learn something very interesting. That which makes kosher skach is something that has to grow out of the ground. Once it grows out of the ground, however, it has to be cut. You can't take a tree and bend it over a sukkah and make it skach. It has to be cut. You have to understand that the things that grow out of this world, those things are ma'aseh yadayim that we make with our hands. We invest our time and our energy. Each one of the days of our lives are fields. And what we do with the energy of that day's life are the seeds that we plant. And what we eat in our future is what we planted in our past. As Harry S. Truman once said, the only thing you don't know about the future is what you forgot to learn from your past. So when you're going to want to claim your future, it will be the result of what you do today. So in that aspect, we still have to cut the umbilical cord. We must understand that it's from this world, but not of this world. A second halacha in the skach is that whatever is used in the skach cannot be able to receive tumah. Now, tumah is an interesting word. In English, I think Rabbi Scroll translates it as impurity. But the word tumah is actually from the word atum. And those of us that lived here in 1991 will all remember our cheder atum. These were the little rooms, our sealed rooms that we ran into when the sirens went off during the Gulf War. Right? That was a perfect example of misunderstanding and thinking we know what the future holds. If you were here as I was in 1991, or even earlier when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, you would have realized that there were Israelis by the dozens flying out of Tel Aviv to Europe because everybody knew that Israel was going to be decimated. It was going to be wiped off the map. And yet in the end, the only missiles that actually hit Israel were the ones that dug the very foundations of our largest skyscrapers today in Ramat Gan. I mean, it's really an amazing situation. And I think often if you ever want to know about what the future is going to hold, read newspapers, listen to TV or watch TV, listen to radio, listen to what everybody, especially the people who know. And that'll be a sure thing what will not happen. Because it's never like that. Every time, I mean, I always say this, sometimes it's a little outrageous, but c'est moi, that I thought about, imagine if you could go back in time and land in a camp in 1941 and say, from the future. And guess what? We're going to all come back to Israel. We're going to build an amazing country. We're going to have all kinds of incredible situations. They're going to be Jews from all four corners of the world sitting in Jerusalem, and you'd be ripped to shreds. If you pick up the New York Times 1941, read the op-ed page. Read which one of the pundits were predicting what actually happened. It's quite funny to read what they think can happen to the Jewish people. But watch what nobody says. Nobody knows what the future holds because it's not ours. It's God's. But we can play on this field. And therefore, this play in the field means that those things that seem to us to be impure, they are merely hidden. That which is tamei is atum. It is like there is or, and there's or haganuz. There is light, and there is hidden light. We have the ability to be able to open up everything to light. But when it comes in a relationship to God, we must make sure that everything is revealed. It's all open. There is nothing roy lekabel tuma, nothing that should be fit within our souls that could be suspect to impurity. Because guess what? You can't play cards with God. It doesn't work. It's all open. And that's another halacha of the Succah, is that the nature of the Succah is you've got to be able to see through the facade. You've got to be able to see the stars and not lose perspective. I saw a very powerful piece written by the Belzer Rabbi today. Belzer Rabbi was a Matzil Shoah, somebody who came out of the camps, and he wanted to get together. It was the first time a group of the Belzer Hasidim were meeting in Jerusalem, and they wanted to sing shir, and no one could, because everyone had lost all their families in the Holocaust. And so nobody could sing. How could they open their mouth? And so he quoted a medrash, actually Rashi brings it a chumash, that only 1/5 of the Jewish people came out of Egypt. And that's the most lenient. There's an opinion that it was 1/50th, and there was another opinion it was only 1 in 500 people came out, meaning that most of the Jewish people were wiped out in Egypt. And yet they were able to sing Shir, Az Yashir Moshe. How could they sing? How could they sing with so much of their family in a blink of an eye behind them was dead? And he points to a very interesting Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, where do we know Tchiyat HaMetim from? Where do we know that there's a source for the resurrection of the dead? And one of the proofs is because it says, Oz Yoshir, in the future tense, that Moses will sing. And so what it teaches us about Moses will sing is that there will be a time when Moses has to come back to life, and during that time will be the resurrection of the dead. But on a deeper level, it teaches something even more important, that there was a level of faith that happened among the Jewish people at the splitting of the sea, that they knew that everybody who had been lost was only temporary. Because there will be a time in the future when everybody will come back to life. This is a fundamental Yud Gimel principle the Rambam brings down. This is not extreme Judaism. This is essential Judaism, is that belief in the resurrection of the dead. Because there's another belief in the resurrection of the dead, and that's among the living. It's one thing to believe that, if you could believe that the dead would come back to life, you have to be able to believe that the living can come back to life. Because there are many people who are alive that are dead, because they're not living who they can be. And this is hinted at in the idea of the Sukkah. The Gra points out that the word Sukkah, I'm sure everybody knows this, are the 3 levels of what a kosher Sukkah is. You have the Samech, which is an ideal 4-wall. You have a Kaf, which is 3 walls. You have the Hey, which is 2 walls, and another piece. But if you look at this, the lesson is very deep. What is Sukkah? We mentioned this before. Faith in God. How do you have faith in God? Well, before you have faith in God, everything's 50-50. Maybe yes, maybe no. It just reminded me, I once met a lawyer who had just become a Choser B'Tshuva. He was what they call, if you guys are from New York, you'll know the expression, he's a 57th Street lawyer, and he actually was. He was in the Squibb building. And I was sitting with him, and he was talking to me about, and not at all a spiritual guy. And I said, well, how does somebody like you become religious? He said, well, I had to sit down. I'm an honest businessman. I said, okay, right, let's go on. Anyhow, he said, I asked him if he was also a lawyer. Anyhow, so he said, I sat down and I thought about all my big deals, and I realized that 70% of my biggest financial business deals were coincidence. I happened to be sitting in the lobby of a hotel in Puerto Rico, and I met this guy, and da-da-da-da-da. And so I realized, well, 70%, that makes God controlling partner of my life. All right, so tell me, what do I do? And he became religious by that. But other than 70%, you get 50-50. Maybe yes, maybe no. Guess what? Once it goes 51-49, you're in the Sukkah. Once you have two walls, that's 50-50, but you now a tefach, another piece of a wall, now you have the hay, you're in the sukkah. You now believe in God. It might be that you fall out of the sukkah a lot, but you got a sukkah. That sukkah of the hay is the hand. You see the hand of God in your life. That beginning of faith at the splitting of the Red Sea, the Jews saw the finger of God. The 5 fingers represents this idea of hay. So now you see God actually in your life. Mazel tov, welcome. And that idea is coming into the sukkah of faith. But it gets deeper if you get deeper. It gets deeper. You know, the Gemara once asks, where is, sorry, it's not the Gemara, it's the Medrash Rabbi asks, where is the end of the universe? And it answers the tip of your longest finger. As long as you can reach, that's how big the universe is. You make it bigger, it got bigger, because it's infinite. The only thing that's finite is our time right here on this planet. And also mine up here speaking, something like five more minutes. So that idea of being able to see the hand of God in our lives, tips 4951 favor God. But now you come to the letter of Kaf. The letter of Kaf is related to the deeper part of the hand, like the Kaf. Now you're no longer seeing the fingers of God in your life. You're now seeing your life in God's hand. Your timeline, your lifeline, your online, right? Whatever it is, that is all here. Now it's no longer that God is maybe dropping in now and then. God is your operating system. He's your OS. That's the platform you're working on. And once you understand that God is on there, now you are able to see God in 3 real walls. By the way, even the hay is also a third wall, right? Because that little pole, it's not a pole, it's a wall defining shetach, like the 3 types of walls we spoke about. So now you have the Kaf. But there's one place you don't see God. Where was God in the Holocaust? Where was God in little children who have cancer? Where was God in my friend who was hit by a car? Where's God there? Okay, fine, I can see God in the Torah, I can see God in a beautiful Shabbat meal, I can see God there, but I don't see God in hell. Does God get to hell? Is hell outside God's jurisdiction? Where is God when there's hell? And that's the 4th wall that we can't see God. And that's why it's called Kaf. Because Kaf is the Hebrew word for dimyon, for imagination. Ke'ilu, one of the most popular words in Israel spoken today is ke'ilu. Right? In English you call it like. Here we call it ke'ilu. I once asked somebody in my office in Israeli, just 5 minutes no ke'ilu, and I think they had a nervous breakdown. So like, ke means like. In fact, this is why, although bar bat mitzvah are 12 and 13 years old, the real bar mitzvah of a human being is 20 years old. Because bar bat mitzvah is only relating to the earthly court. But being responsible for the heavenly court begins at the age of 20, regardless of male or female. Why? Because at 20, now you've got all your imaginatory powers. Now you are going to go out and change that world. Maybe. And at that point in your life, that's the difficult point of knowing what is and what isn't and where does it all go. But there's still faith. And at that point, if you can turn the final corner, if you can feel the hand close around you, if you can be somech on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the samech of the 4 walls of the sukkah. Then you are completely inside. Then you realize it's not merely God is in my life occasionally. It's not merely, okay, I'm walking gently because this is the operating system. It is 24/7. It's the only reason we're here. And you have to see it like that. You've got to be able to see through the facade. You've got to be able to see heaven in everything you do. And the only way to really do that is to discover the 5th wall. The 5th wall is to be like afar, to be like the earth, to be humble in front of everybody. To love God is to love life. To love life is to treat every breath as sacred. And to see every breath as sacred can only happen when you realize we are in a finite world and time is limited. And when we can appreciate that, our heart opens to love. And one of the beautiful things of love, and I'll stop here, is a very strange Gemara in Sota. The Gemara says there that finding one's beshert is as difficult as the splitting of the Red Sea or the Reed Sea. I mean, Well, what's difficult? For who is it difficult? Was the splitting of the sea, again, the beginning of our faith, Was the splitting of the sea difficult for God? Hurry up, Moses. I don't hold this another few minutes. Come on. Benjamin, move. I mean, was it hard for God to split the sea? I mean, God could do it behind the back while making other universes. I mean, what was hard? Nothing. Want to see me split a universe? It's not hard. So what, was it hard for us? I mean, do you have Hasidim that go on Pesach down to the Red Sea and try to split the water ceremonially? I mean, no, it's not hard. It's impossible. We can't split the sea. So what's this kasher? Who is it hard for? For God, not hard at all. For us, also not hard. Impossible. So what does the language mean? It means it was hard for us to believe. Catch that word, belief and faith. It was hard for us to believe that God would love us so much that God would rip apart a sea if need be for us to live. That was hard. Why was that hard? Because we don't believe in ourselves to such a degree. If you don't love yourself, there's two major problems. A, nobody else can love you. Because if somebody else says, I love you, how could they really? I don't even love me. Maybe they don't even know who I really am. And they're saying they love me. And the other problem is, you can't give what you don't have. You can't tell somebody I love you if you don't love yourself. Because it's got to be in there. And once you accept yourself as realizing, not that you're simply nice, not that you're simply wonderful, not that you're simply great. Ready for this word? You, us, are an imperative. We are an imperative. The fact that you exist means that God, in infinite wisdom, realized that when there would be, and if there is, and here is creation, you had to be a part of it. You had to be in it. You have to be a player. And until you realize that uniqueness of yourself, the imperativeness of God's love for you to rip open everything, you won't have a future. Because you'll be trapped by your past in the way that we have typecast ourselves and each other. God forbid. And we can break through that with the fifth wall by being humble and allow ourselves to open up and to experience love and experience life. I bless all of you that this should be a year of experiencing love and life in your lives.